we can be particularly hard on ourselves and judge ourselves by how well or poorly, good or bad, we think we're showing up or doing it, whatever the it is. And I understand that, but how well or poorly we act in any situation is really, that's just the conditioned patterns of our minds. That's what we're working on, is shifting the conditioned patterns. And when that happens, what I found useful is to connect back with what my sincere, as a Dharma practitioner, my sincere aspiration or intentions are. And I'll bet everyone has a good intention, and whatever your own languaging is, of wanting to live in a way that creates less suffering in the world for yourself, for others, wants to create more well-being for yourself and for others. And if that's true for you, even when you're at your worst, you can still know that you really do care about that intention, and that's alive for you. And I find it going back to that somehow, and know that still is my good intention, and I'm doing the best I can. We're all just doing the best I can. And then it is helpful, so we're not too hard on ourselves, and we can still stay attuned, let that intention kind of bolster us, kind of a thing.
Wholeness, welcome. This is Josh of Integrating Presence, and today I have Richard Shankman with me, and hopefully I am containing my enthusiasm or bringing enough equanimity to my enthusiasm, because seriously, I really appreciate this. I've been doing exclusively for, since I've practiced every day since 2012, the last couple of years, my practice has been exclusive on Anapana, around the Anapana spot in the Pa-Auk tradition. Just to give Richard a little bit of background here before I get going, and to make this kind of more real. And I still haven't got Nimitta in this tradition. So that's kind of my bias a little bit, but I am also open to this huge topic on many levels from the text, but we're going to focus more on practice today. So I'm already jumping into it, but I'll throw it back here to Richard and say, Richard, what's going on today and how are you?
Well, I'm well, happy to be with you. And, I'll just say my whole practice has been mindfulness of breathing meditation I've been doing 55 years. That's a long time.
This is great. And
I've done other practices, but really that has been, and my experience has been, it just opens up. And I think any practice we do can be a doorway to open into everything. It's a question of finding each person's best way. And so for those for whom mindfulness of breathing in its many, many varieties is a good practice, and I think it is probably for many, many people, that, it's been a doorway kind of to everything. So really, that's been my practice.
Awesome. And I am so overly enthusiastic here. Hopefully it's balanced somewhat, because for those of you, probably everybody listening to this would know that Richard has kind of this seminal book, I would say, on Samadhi. And not only, I would say, and I'm not that familiar, actually, I haven't gone through it in detail, but I would venture to say it is really comprehensive and very thorough and wide reaching, and at the same time, very accessible and practical as well. And so maybe you would touch a little bit on this a little bit before we jump right into Samadhi, and any kind of background, I think, other than what you said. I think that's kind of, before we just jump right in here.
Well, there was a couple of things I'm not sure. Perhaps you can guide me. As far as a little background, you said something about the book, and maybe should I just say something about that? That's kind of how you know me, or?
Yeah, I would think so. And of course, your name comes up in Dharma talks from time to time, especially when people talk about Samadhi,
Yeah.
So
Well,
the book title and your name comes up here and there, yeah.
Well, I came up, so first I'll just say my original practice actually started in 1970, and I was more in a, what would you say, Hindu-oriented yoga traditions. I lived in an ashram, and actually I was doing mostly breath meditation. It was a different tradition and different way of just framing everything. And then it was in kind of the early or mid 70s. I was still meditating, but I ended up more in the Buddhist oriented, kind of Theravāda oriented world. And that's been kind of my world I've sort of lived in. Of course, I don't want to get us too far off, but having said that, of course, as the practice becomes more and more alive, you really end up, you're not in any tradition anymore. It's just the aliveness of being. And, where's Buddhism in that? So that's a big topic. People might say, well, wait a minute, what do you mean? So to be honest with you, well, it's too late, I have to say now. So people who I work with wouldn't really know this, but I actually don't identify as a Buddhist anymore. Nobody would know that. This is the tradition. It's the formulation. It's the framework. Tremendous respect and gratitude for it. But in my own self, like in just the moment and just the aliveness of being, there's no. You wouldn't say it's a Buddhist thing, but we still don't want to throw the path out too soon, right?
Well, yeah, you make good points. Even the Buddha said eventually easy for me to say.
Or the raft, right?
The raft of Dhamma has to be left behind on the further shore, right? Yeah. So there's that. And I always tell people basically the same thing. I don't consider myself a Buddhist. I study and practice this primarily right now, but to me, I don't even look at Buddhism as a religion anyway. To me, one way to frame it maybe is one approach of how to see into the true nature of reality, the way things actually are, and the best way to go about doing that for my own well-being and for the well-being of others, and especially in the long term. So I can definitely resonate with this. I think you're alluding to even going beyond that as well.
Of course, let's not jump out of the raft too soon.
Yeah. I'm still definitely on the raft.
Also, I want to say, I hope just to clarify, I'm not making any claims for myself. I don't make any claims. I would say, anyway, I feel like I'm very appreciative and gratified and about what the practice has done and where it's kind of done for me and gotten. So in that way, it's been great. And I don't make claims about it in any way. That's not me. That's not code for, I really am making claims, but I'm too humble to say it. I mean, for real.
Yeah. No, it's a good point. And I'm heavy with disclaimers myself a lot of times. So it's really helpful that, and I'll just say right now, this is, of course, it should be obvious, but this is my current understanding where I'm at now. I'm open to, being completely wrong with everything and moving beyond that. But for right now, this is the best I'm able and accessible. So let's jump in here. The Anapana, I guess we can reference maybe the Anapanasati Sutta. And I think to keep it even more accessible and still foundational for anybody doing this practice, we can kind of just stay maybe more focused towards the opening part of it, So I guess maybe one place to jump in here is what are some kind of fundamental similarities and differences between, the tradition you're in before, the Hindu maybe oriented tradition, and where the Buddhist tradition. And I'll just, some ways we can answer here. We can answer for the absolute complete beginner that has no idea of any of this stuff. We've got maybe more of an intuitive level of how much we can sense into who may be listening to this, and maybe in the future, and maybe with repeated listenings. I don't know if that's a little bit too much magical thinking or not, but we have, and then the another layer is just all no holds barred. Use as much technical language and as depth and breadth as you want. It doesn't matter if anybody understands it or not, So any of those approaches or levels are completely, I would encourage any of those levels or anything else too. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there are two things there. I know you brought up that you're going to want to get into like some hands-on nuts and bolts about actually breath meditation.
Yes.
And so, I know that'll be but you brought up the first part you brought up. So I just want to say, I'm going to say something that I think I don't intend it to be controversial, and I'm sort of prefacing here, but, by the way, if I say something and someone doesn't like it, that's okay. You just move on.
Exactly. Well, I don't shy away from controversy at all in this. I mean, everybody that I have is civil and diplomatic about controversy too. We don't shy away or run away from it either.
Yeah. I say that. Okay. So now that I've said that, it feels a little risky, but I'm just going to say it. So I consider Buddhism, or the Dharma or the path, in any of its forms, Buddhism is a big world, right? And anyway, it's a big world. In any of its form, to be a complete path, but a narrow path. And what I mean by that is, this is the part that I think might feel a little, I hope it doesn't seem disrespectful because I don't mean it that way. As in many traditions, Buddhism has a certain idea of where it wants to end people. Traditionally, the idea is what they might call Nibbāna, or they use the term the Deathless, and you'll hear this kind of language of ending the cycle of births and deaths and all of that. So all of that stuff is for sure real, no question about it. But I would, there's a tension point here, not a tension. That's not the right way to say it. I think there's sort of two parts that can seem at odds, but I think there's a way to come together. One is we want to have an idea of practicing in a tradition or a system of where it's aiming. And so we already come to it. We might hear a teacher or teaching about what is it about? What are you trying to have happen? Where are you aiming the practice? So there's that. But then right along with that, because the world of Samadhi is so vast, the things that can happen and just the world of spirituality it's just wondrous and amazing. It can open in a lot of ways that may not align with a predetermined idea of what's supposed to happen. And so then the question is, how much do we aim ourselves knowing whatever's happening, we keep aiming back to some idea where we think we want to head. And a lot of teachers are very clear about that. And we need those teachers to be clear, and we want for sure. And how much do we allow the inner unfolding, the way to reveal itself, and we follow? So there's knowing where we're aiming and how much to follow. And I think we have to kind of bring a little, and if I can, I'll just give you one. Can I just give one quick example? Is that all right?
Please. Yes, please.
Yeah. So this is an example. Just a few months ago, someone whom I work with in their meditation called me from a retreat. And, there were teachers there, and for whatever, anyway, she called me. And she said, so she's right in the Buddhist traditional Theravāda Pali Buddhist Dharma world. And she called me, she used very non-Buddhist language. She said she'd gotten in some deep states, some jhana kind of states, and said, this was her language, a shaft of divine light has entered her body. And I'm thinking, well, that sounds pretty nice. The next day she calls me again. She said, it's changed now. And now instead of being a shaft of light, her whole body has become filled with a body of divine light. And then she said, Mother Mary appeared to her. And she said, I don't know what that's about, because she didn't have any relationship. She's not a Christian, no relationship to Mother Mary. But it was Mother Mary, and she was beckoning her, drawing her to merge in divine love. What should I do? And she had gone to the teachers, and they had said, no, you're not supposed to have that because you're going to cling to, but they got off on whatever. And you're supposed to be just letting go, or I forgot exactly. And I'm not criticizing those teachers. I understand that they were teaching from their way, and that's fine. And what I said to her was, I said, look, if your body becomes a body of divine light, and then Mother Mary appears to you, drawing you to merge in divine love, you do that. And I said to her, it was so obvious, the goodness and the rightness of it. But that doesn't fit a traditional kind of Buddhist or maybe thing. So then that's the kind of thing. So so the way can reveal itself in just amazing ways. And I'll just end by this. I know I'm going on a little bit here. Is again, us Buddhists, we like to think, well, we've got the real highest, and I think there's value in that. But I think it's much bigger and more vast than any one view. Anyway,
this is a really good point. And I've done a few online things with Richard, and I love this. He's mentioned this before. And I think this is a really good jumping in point for lots and lots of things. Yes, I think maybe even more strict when I hear reports from let's just, I might as well just use different traditional names here. The Vipassana style of Goenka, where the teacher is not even there anymore. And from what I understand, I haven't done one myself, but they wheel out a television. I hope I'm okay with saying
Yeah.
this. And, there is no
Sure.
real living teacher. They defer to his original teachings, which I can see pros and cons. But when people are having, and there's quite a lot of interesting experiences I hear can come up during Goenka retreats, but they seem like they, where's the living teacher that can go in? So that I would say
Yeah.
even more extreme than what you're talking about. And you're right. So on one hand, we have the Samadhi where, samatha practices that can get very kind of focused, and laser beam focused and stable and exclusive on one object. But the other end of that is what that does, I don't know if that's the cause of condition for it, but the states of samadhi and the doors that can open, the at least in my experience, I've noticed that, and I'm not claiming certain types of jhanas yet either. It's just the perception can become so malleable and so expanded, and so many more choices become available. And just by, I think, some people's nature, when you get into really deep and subtle realms, then certain phenomena that come up are not necessarily in the canon. We think of the teaching with the handful of leaves, and even though the Buddha knew all this vast knowledge, he stuck to the one of the most important things that he said, and only taught that. But he knew about all. I would just
Yeah.
assume,
Yeah.
right? But he didn't go into it. But however, for yogis, we have some of these experiences happen. And Richard, I'm no stranger to this. The people that I talk to in the circles are very bizarre. And actually, I might even flip this around a little bit from some of the accounts that I've heard here, that even there'll be some interfaces with some beings that come in pretending to be vessels of light, but are actually cloaking themselves in this. And for some practitioners, they will investigate it a little bit further and see something else behind this appearance that they're and I'm not saying that's what happened in this case, but what I'm saying is I just want to echo your point that there's the map is way bigger, I think, than
Yeah.
I think we're led to believe, and especially in Western circles where there's so many academics involved. And not to knock that, we've got a lot of, but they're rear is on the line a lot of times to keep tenure, where some of these things are just off the table to talk about,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
in a rational scientific mind, they can't really mention these things, a fear of losing. I know it's gotten a little bit better. So we need really deep practitioners, I think, from all walks of life. And we need, I think, each other to check. And of course, everything needs to be verified by the wise. When we get into territories like this, we do
Yeah.
need
Yeah.
alternative supports and people opening up to them, just because I feel it's so unbalanced in the West these days. And I push my teacher to talk more about these things, but I think it can ultimately be a distraction, but just due to the
Yeah.
unbalanced nature right now, I feel a more openness and willingness to explore these things, just because it's been so
Yeah.
scientifically, materialist based, that these things need to be opened
Yeah.
up to more in the West, really.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So,
Well,
yeah.
and there were a couple of things there that kind of struck me. One is you mentioned the Goenka tradition, which is a good example. And, I know plenty of people for whom that's the practice they should be doing. It's great for them, but for a lot of people, it isn't. And they're an example of what I call a one-size-fits-all practice. That's not disparaging in any way. That's fine, because what they're saying is they're very pure to a particular way. And they're saying, hey, if you want to come practice with us, this is what it is, and this is what you do. And then you can go check that out. And if that works, great. The problem, and it's not a problem, but the only thing about that is it does not matter what the practice is. No matter what, it's going to work for some people, and for other people, it's not good. It doesn't matter what it is. And so that's where I think people who don't know and are newer can get into trouble, because they don't realize that, and they think, oh, there's something wrong with me. It happens in the Pa-Auk tradition too. I know you, and I'm not trying to get into your personal practice or anything like that. I
No,
don't know you
please.
well enough to
No,
do that.
it's on the table if you want to. Yes. So, yeah.
Well, all I
Yeah.
would say is I've known a lot of Pa-Auk practitioners. Pa-Auks method, which, by the way, in my book, I've interviewed him, and when being in his presence, I don't want to do his practice, but when I was with him, there was something palpable, and I thought, I want what he's got. But the doorway in isn't his way. Actually, I know people, Pa-Auk is kind of funny because he tends to sort of have this certain way, like you have to do breath meditation. Not good for everyone. I mean, you can do these 4 elements and other stuff too, but you breath meditation, and you got to pay attention to the breath in a very specific way. And I know people who've gotten all through his whole system authorized by Pa-Auk as having. One guy told me, I was talking to him when I was doing my book, and he said, yeah, and he was someone who was, I wanted to talk to him because he had been authorized by Pa-Auk as having gone through all of Pa-Auk's jhanas. But he said, now listen, don't tell Pa-Auk. But what actually happened was he started seeing right in the third eye area a blue dot, and it was very compelling, and he just kind of went with that. And that's what, and he goes, but then he got into what Pa-Auk said was his real jhana. But he says, now don't tell Pa-Auk. But I didn't tell Pa-Auk that's how he did it. So even with Pa-Auk, it shows that even though, he's a great master, but, anyway, but
no, it's a good point. Yes.
Yeah. The other thing I just wanted to say, not to belabor on that, is as with all systems, Pa-Auk has a very specific idea around samadhi and jhana. And it turns out, I don't know if you want to get into this, but the deeper stages of samadhi, there's at least 2 main categories we can put them in and how they unfold that are equally deep. People tend to think, oh, well, the Pa-Auk is just deeper. Not deeper, different. And I can tell you why if you want. And most people, the Pa-Auk way, you have to try it if you're drawn to it and see, and you'll know if it's work. Most people are never going to get a visual Nimitta. Never has nothing to do with how deep their practice is. The Nimitta manifests in many felt sense in the body. So it's just not going to get a visual. For visual people, they will. Most people aren't going to get what we call the narrow one-pointed ekagata. They'll get an open, broader, but they're still just as ekagata, if people may not know the term. So it's a lot of flavors for it. So I don't know, Josh, you may very well be getting into what I would call a sutta jhana. It may just not be a Visuddhimagga jhana. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's that in that. And so, yeah, let me give you a little background here. A lot of things. And before all this, though, you said the narrow path, and that's actually my ex-partner described Theravāda as the narrow path. It's considered the lesser vehicle, and Mahayana is considered a greater vehicle. So for me, that makes sense that it's more of a straight. Not everybody can do it. There's that's a whole nother thing. Maybe that's not what you meant by that.
That's not what I meant.
Okay, that's not what you meant. Okay,
that's fine.
Sure.
You can say what you mean.
It reminded me of that, though. But yeah,
sure.
I kind of see where you.
I meant something different, which I can explain. But
sure.
Your way. I like what you said too.
Well, yeah, I think maybe both apply, but I'll give you a chance to go back and say that. So the Pa-Auk, as far as what I notice. Oh, and I'm sorry here. I forgot to. I'm getting a call here, and I forgot to mute or turn off this. So sorry for the technical difficulties. Which, by the way. Richard and Richard was experiencing technical difficulties, and I didn't say that because it was seamless behind the scenes, but I think it's worth pointing out that this happens to me sometimes, and I just take it as maybe a sign that this is an important conversation. Okay, yeah. So now
these things happen.
Exactly, anicca, right? The blue dot, though, from what you said, really great things that I want to hear, and I've never. I tell people I won't talk about jhana solo because it's so controversial. It's almost like a Buddhist trigger word for some. Even
it shouldn't be.
It shouldn't be, of course not. Exactly. And even the word nimitta is a trigger word, but I think people are getting better. But I talk to other practitioners and teachers about it, of course. And I would say, yeah, the things that I was experiencing in more what's known as sutta jhana, which is not as strict criteria. Yeah, I thought that I was, experiencing, what was described as jhana by a lot of those other, folks. But then when I get to this really more narrow criteria, I don't even know if narrow, different criteria of what some people call Visuddhimagga-jhana, right? That, or whatever we want to call it, that Pa-Auk uses. It's usually light-based. And I love this reference about visual because I've noticed before I go into my regular practice, if I do another practice outside of it and focus more on visual phenomena, then I tend to have more kind of light arise, but it still hasn't stabilized. And from what I've heard, this notion of a dot, um, or a blue light, right? Is maybe considered a nimitta for some too. And then
Sure.
once it's stabilized, then you can use that as the meditation object. And
Yeah. That's
so
hardly any people will ever get that, but there are some who do.
exactly. So maybe we can talk about that. Why you feel that this is, and it makes sense to me, but maybe you can go into more detail about how this is, for some visual people, is more, or it's more accessible, this type. I would just say because it's, it involves light and a visual nimitta. But for some people, you don't feel it's like this. And I do want to echo too that skillful means, right? So yes, skillful means is where it's at. And I think that some people would be maybe better off depending on their disposition, where they're at too. There's also something to say about continued effort. Where I came to this though, Richard, need to take a pause here while I do something else in the household. I'm so sorry for the interruptions I experienced in today. But everything seems almost on a conceptual level. So this is where, when you get into, once you pass the samatha stage in Pa-Auk, you get into discerning ultimate materiality and ultimate mentality, which is not a concept apparently. And so, and then the more difficulty or challenge for me, not difficulty, is that I practice and live more in the Thai forest tradition, where I have to be careful not to get too much into Pa-Auk stuff in Thai forest tradition. So it's a balancing act.
Oh, yeah. Well, let me just back up here. So I can just say where I come from both as a practitioner and as a teacher. Getting back to this notion that I mentioned earlier about this kind of bringing together these two aspects of having an idea of where you're aiming, but also allowing just what's happening to reveal itself in kind of a path presents itself that we follow. What I do is I definitely have ideas. I start off not what should happen, but I want to help people work in a way to help their minds start to stabilize. And that's the samadhi part, start to grow. We can get in a whole nother conversation because I don't actually separate out what you'd call mindfulness, concentration, insight, and the heart qualities. They're not the same thing, but they're all come in there. So a lot of people will separate them as separate ways of practice. That's totally fine. For me, they're all there, and you get the best of all of it. So we start by, and so even with that, I don't come at it with a predetermined idea. What I do is when I meet with people, oftentimes they know, but if they don't know, then I want to say, well, let's find together your best doorway in, the best practice for you that may not be breath meditation. Some people, I don't know, it could be mantras or meditation on sound or body scans. There's a lot of practices. Most people, I think breath's probably is good. And then how do you work with the breath? It turns out it actually does not matter where in the body there's nothing special about here. It's just a sensation. Actually, with Pa-Auk, it's not even a sensation. It's a mental idea because he wants you to be out in space. How do you do that? I don't know. But if you can do it, God bless you, go for it. So whatever. And so we help people find their practice. It could shift over time, sure. Everybody can find a good practice. Sometimes they need a little help. We can always get there. We might have to do some experiments. We'll try this and we see, but we can get there. And then once that happens, we see how is it unfolding? And we let the present moment experience reveal itself, and it tells what's needed next. So in that way, we're doing two things. It's helping us to follow the deepening, what helps the deepening of samadhi. And it also helps us then stay attuned to what's happening. What are the experiences that are as the samadhi is deepening? And then that's kind of revealing itself. And then sometimes I do want to help people say, I do think we should not go that way and steer it back here, which you can do. And this is a big topic. I'm just speaking so generally here. I can't get specific, but let's steer it back because that seems the way. And I've actually had people not follow my advice and kind of get off into things that maybe weren't so great. And it's like, I told you. But anyway, we need to steer them back. So that way, sometimes we still do want to steer people, but right along that way, we're letting the organicity or the wonder, the magic, not magic, but unfold and reveal itself. And they're really connecting with their own deepest inner guidance teacher. This might sound a little new agey, but really the ways there, and it can look a lot of ways. This is what I meant, by the way, when I said I appreciated what you said about a narrow path, because it can be a narrow path right to Nibbāna, right? For sure. You didn't use the word, but I think that's what you meant. I mean in a different way. I mean, even the idea of what we would call, some people might know this term, Nibbāna without remainder, or we call ending the cycle, the deathless, ending the cycle of birth and deaths. Actually, let me back up for a second. So here I'm going to be controversial again. So, in the Buddhist tradition, it's said, if you could, this is the tradition speaking, if you could see as the Buddha could see, immense, incalculable lifetimes of all the beings, you would know that the only thing that you really want to do is like end this process, right? Two problems with that. Okay, I'm going to say it. Number one, we don't know what the mind of the Buddha was. I don't mean that disrespectfully. Nobody knows. And are we really claiming that he actually had direct knowledge into every living being, the billions upon billions who've ever existed, who do now, or who ever will? Maybe. I don't know. But so that's the tradition talking. Secondly, you can dissolve out of existence. It's a way of speaking into the deathless. It's not a thing you can't go into. It's just a way of speaking. But that process can happen. And then you can come back into being and know what had happened. And absolutely, that's real. However, in that, to know that if you could really see what's going on, you'd want to just snuff out and end it. That's nobody knows that either. I don't care if they're sitting up on the stage with a shaved head and dressed in robes. They do not know that. It's religious belief. And I've had these things. Well, now I'm making a complaint. This can happen, not to be confused with a cessation, which is a different thing, but they can mask as each other. So that's a different conversation. So that can happen. If you're opening into the divine, it's a different feeling. And there you're not thinking of, it's a different way. It's like going to, this is kind of weird. It's popped in my head. Actually, it's kind of nice. I will say, going to Nibbāna is like going to zero. Opening to the divine is like going to the infinite. And so there are sort of two ways. And, so that's what I mean by narrow. It's like, if you want to have a certain idea, it's beautiful. You go for that, but it's no matter what way you're viewing it, it's not the entirety.
These are, wow, a lot of great points here and a lot of things to address. It reminds
I'm
me
going to get in trouble.
Oh, it's okay. We're supposed to be forgiving anyway, right? So, it reminds me of the Nisargadatta Maharaj quotes where, wisdom tells me I'm nothing, love tells me I'm everything. Between these two, my life flows. And so, as far as Nibbāna goes, the mind of the Buddha, and I asked my teacher this, and I asked him how he perceives the 31 realms, and like, where does Mount Meru fit into this whole thing? And he basically, I think it was maybe a non-answer answer. Basically, we don't really know the mind of a Buddha and how it maps on different cosmologies, which is
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, and that's one way. And to fit it into some other things in the canon, he said there's no discernible beginning, no discernible end. So in that sense, we don't really know the extent. What it said, though, he wasn't all knowing, but what he aimed the mind at, he could then penetrate and know. So it's not like this omniscient all the time. So in that case, you would have to be directed.
We don't know that either.
We don't know that either. That's right. It's saying there's a lot we don't know. And so that's it. The one thing that sticks out, another thing that sticks out when we go into these more vast vistas here, is that I don't remember too many mentions of divinity in the canon. We have the divine I, which is really interesting, I think. We have that notion.
Has a very specific meaning.
Exactly.
That's not what we're talking about. Because
I always wondered about that.
Look, and when dissolving away, and there's only the deathless, which is, again, we're using these words for things that are really ineffable.
Exactly. They can only point at best. Yeah.
But there's no problem because there's nobody there to have a problem, right?
Well, that's
it's just no problem. But it's so fine, and whatever way people go, I respect it. Sure. And it's beautiful and it's laudable, and we want to support people. But then people are having, whether it's happening through meditation or other traditions, or even, I don't want to get off into like psychoactive substances, but I'll just say people are doing things through that too, that are opening, and that's coming into Dharma. So the realm of what's possible, I think, is people are experiencing on some vast ways, and then they see how do these map together, and then we have to feel our own way.
I would agree for the most part with this. And especially, I think, these days where we've kind of been dumbed down a lot and constricted and narrowed, now it's a time to go back and open up. The one thing from the canon, too, that kind of blew my mind and put things into perspective, because we talk about this tetralemma of someone asked the Buddha one time, I think, after enlightenment, will I exist? Will I not exist? Will I both exist and not exist, or will I neither exist and not exist? And he said, it doesn't fit the case. It does not apply. So then all the things we're kind of talking about here, they're just not really fathomable. And it doesn't, when we talk, so it cuts, for me, that one cuts off a lot of proliferation around this topic that, that I want to try to pin it down with existentialism or not, in all these different combinations. And it blows my mind to think that none of that even applies. Yeah. So it's, and he just, he laid out a path. And then once that's reached, the holy life's lived, there's no more work to be done, but he doesn't go into detail about after that, and then the Mahayana view of all that. So there's a lot to this,
and there's another aspect to this, which is, I think, not really separate, but it's another way of speaking. So, we've been kicking around ideas that, well, I would use labels from what we've been talking about, that we'll use what enlightenment, realization, awakening, or some of the terms.
Liberation, sure.
Well, so liberation is an interesting one because in my mind, this may not be other people, I tend to use it as something connected, but actually different, because liberation, and I was about to say, actually, I'm glad you brought that up, that to me, a simple way to bring this right back down, very accessible, is if we use this framework, what I will call liberation through non-clinging. It kind of encompasses everything, because we do these practices of non-clinging, letting go, and it gets right down to everyday life, and it carries all the way up through whether it's the divine or the deathless or anything like, or just as deep of a liberation as we just move about in daily life, and and that way, and so it's a different way to hold things. That tends to be for me now my own practice. I still meditate, and I don't know what would happen if I stopped. I don't know. I still do. Haven't done that experiment, but mostly my practice now for me, has gotten very simple. I just live, and mostly, it's pretty good. And I move about, and I'm, anybody's practiced for a long time, that stream of samadhi carries through, the stream of wakefulness, the stream of non-clean. It's very alive, right? And so it's kind of like that, and you kind of cleaned out, and you're sort of emptied out. Well, you're kind of filled up to it. Well, okay. Sorry, that's kind of hard to talk about. But then you just live. Anytime I end up in any kind of clinging or reactivity, pretty much it. And during those times, you know what to do, and you let go. When my heart's in ill will, open the heart. So I mostly live, and then when needed, let go, open the heart, let go, open the heart, and live. And so it's and I don't have to do it as a practice. You just live. As we all know, a fruit of the practice is the actual mindful knowing gets way better. We claim you can never space out. Okay, we won't maybe go take it that far. It gets pretty good. If something's going on, you know it, and you're not entangled in it so much. You just know, oh, I got a mind of ill will here. And you might even know, I don't really want to let this go because that person really is a whatever. And it's like, okay, you know what to do. Open the heart. I'm in reactivity. I don't like this. I know what to do. Let go. So in that way, to me, it's kind of come full circle around into something that's actually very, very simple.
And this is so great because I often look for commonalities amongst all these different schools and religions, and I think that's one that is more universal too. We talked earlier about lineages, and I like to say about preserving lineages so we have something to draw on, so it just doesn't get this huge soup or gray hive mind type things. But there's also something to be said about where's the commonality, where's the common language. Of course, non-clinging, letting go is one of them. And I like translating between people more on a divinity path with Buddhist language too, and having these things talk and share amongst each other. The Brahma Viharas are, I think, one of these commonalities too. And so, all this stuff is really great. And the non-clinging and this notion of an awakening of a Buddha, which means awake, right? This is one thing that all the schools kind of acknowledge. And I would say even the schools acknowledge Four Noble Truths, at least in Buddhism, even if it is to completely say, oh, there is no suffering, no, in Mahayana or whatever, no cause or whatever, they're still acknowledged in some way. So I think this is...
Tell that to them when they're suffering.
Exactly, right? I mean, come on, seriously.
How's that working for you?
Yeah, exactly. So the Buddha was a pragmatist for sure.
But if it helps them let go to bring that in, then now it's that practical.
That's a really good point. Very good point. Okay, so let's bring this back to the breath too. And I just want to say, for my own practice, this is what I was doing for years too, Richard, is kind of sitting down either right before formal sitting practice or during it, just kind of tapping into intuition and say, okay, like what's needed now? Like, where does the mind really have to I mean, what does the practice look like now? What's needed now? And I was practicing like that for years, and it served me fairly well. But like I said earlier, it kind of came down to, I was just dealing in concepts, and I was wondering, and then you also mentioned, and I think this is really important too, okay, we can't just not have any kind of point or goal. But then we also can't be like in our Western mindset where we're all goal oriented and goal driven and having all these metrics, So, where's the practical balance in this?
Yeah.
You alluded to a lot of this, and also the importance of a teacher too, to, help nurture and bring forth an inner teacher, but also get someone back on track and make sure that they're not completely off in the weeds. And there's like a kind of a mirroring aspect, in a guiding aspect, and a really rooted in deep experiential practice, and that has also other people checking them, and so I think this comes in as well. Yeah, and how do we? And then I guess and then I want to go into like the nuts and bolts of Anapana too.
Sure.
Like the big thing I think I think that's enough to comment on. Then we can get into nuts and bolts here.
I think, and I know you want to move more into nuts and bolts, which is great. But just one thing you brought up, I think the way I would kind of rephrase exactly what you were saying is, it's interesting because you'll hear teachers use language like, there's nothing to do, nothing to be, nowhere to go, and that kind of language. But at the same time, we are on a path that is a path of development and is leading somewhere. So in a way, it can seem like, well, wait a minute. We're kind of on a path and we're going somewhere and not going anywhere at the same time. Well, how can that be? But actually, and I can understand this, but actually, I do think those things, I actually talk about this a lot. Those things come together, I think, quite nicely when we realize, of course, we're on a path of development and cultivation that's leading somewhere. So that's the getting somewhere part. But the way we do that is just, it's kind of a cliche, the quality of how we're being here. That's the not going anywhere. So we're tending to the present moment, which really is all we have. That's kind of a cliche, but it's true. We only have the present moment by being here without a sense of, and what's happening, what's skillful, what's wise, what works best just for being here. We both have the not over striving, not over. And the other thing is, sometimes people say, yeah, I'm not supposed to want whatever. Of course you want it. Everybody wants, like Samadhi's great. It's really pleasant.
Chanda.
Everybody wants it. And everybody goes through clinging. So they don't make a big deal about it. It's all right. Go ahead. This is a whole nother thing. I think teachers make too big of a deal about people not clinging. I'm trying to be a little humorous, but really I think, you know what? You just go ahead, cling away. It's fine. Now you're going to suffer, but maybe that's how you learn. So it's part of the path.
Of course, knowing suffering and ceasing suffering. That's right.
Yeah.
And you talked about wholesome desires. So we don't want to throw away that raft too early either.
Yeah.
And there's a whole notion of, okay, I've been trying to let this go and let go, but it seems like it's clinging on to me. And I've heard some teachings saying, well, when the time's right, maybe what we're trying to let go of will let go of us, which I thought was an interesting way to flip it in perspective. Yeah, exactly.
Right, because it's true, isn't it, that there are times when it's one thing when we've lost our mindfulness, we're just entangled in things, and we just aren't clearly seeing what's happening. And then there's a step when we know what's happening and we're clear, and still we're either not able or willing, or something's not there, still can't let go around it. And then at some point, it shifts, it lets go of us, or we find the key or whatever it is, and then it can happen. So yeah, we can totally, that's the worst, right? We see what's happening. I can see I'm creating my own suffering right here. And it's hard to let go.
But it's such a good sign, because it's at that point, it's as long as there's continued, I think, effort and practice, it's only a matter of time before that happens, because, that's what's so great about awareness and knowing something, because then there's a chance to make a choice if the choice is involved. That's right. But sometimes maybe the parami is not ripe enough, or, the insight hasn't sank deep into the bones, or maybe there's some action we still need to take, or whatever. There's so many different causes and conditions and kind of mysterious processes that happen. But I think for practitioners listening to this, they can definitely relate to what we've been talking about here.
Yeah.
Okay. So now I think maybe a good jumping in point here, of course, that, across all what constitutes jhana or not, I think the commonality here is the jhanic factors. Even in we hear about Pa-Auk jhana or Visuddhimagga-based, right, or Nimitta-based, light-based jhana. It's, from what I understand, and I don't know from personal experience, that the absorption is so deep that you're not supposed to check the jhanic factors. You're supposed to have to emerge from jhana first, and then in retrospect, look back and say, okay, check the jhanic factors, which I just like, it's hard for me to fathom that. That's such a deep concentration that it's not even possible to get knocked out, through sense. So like if somebody were to come up and hit you, this classic story where Moggallana and Sariputra are sitting there, and I think Yaka or demon hits Sariputra on the head, and he's unfazed, and Moggallana tells him later, oh, I can't believe, there was a big Yaka there, and you got hit in the head, and you didn't even notice it. You're unfazed, your concentration is so strong. And he said, he's like, oh, how amazing it is that you were able to see that Yaka do that, so.
Right, but what I would say is, what you're getting to is different, not depths of samadhi, but flavors. So can I back up just for a moment here? Would that be all right?
Yes.
Yeah. So the word samadhi, we translate it as concentration. I think it's probably, we're stuck with it because everyone uses that, but I think it's actually a quite terrible, because there's too many connotations in English,
especially in the West. Yes, in English.
It means undistracted. So you've you've spoken since during our time here about a particular flavor of undistracted, where you can be so good at becoming undistracted on, we call it a one thing. We say it's not literally a point, but just on the one. If you're seeing light and bliss, it'll only be light and bliss, say, or something like that. And you get so good that you stop noticing other things around you. And that's the kind that you're talking about. We call it like an exclusive one-pointed samadhi. Because for you, if that happens to that depth, the changing flow of experience stops for you in your awareness while you're in that state. But there's a different kind of samadhi that's just as deep of a stopping. But rather than the being on an object fixed like that, the mind can be quite broad and inclusive, and all experience are there, but it's the mind itself that's unmoving and imperturbable, just as deep. And matter of fact, the way I think about it is, so I don't know brain science. What I'm about to say may not be actually how it works, but I think the idea works, that whatever it is in the brain centers that have you come to what we use this jhanic factor of ekaggata, we say one-pointedness or unification of mind, is the same in all these jhanas. In this Visuddhimagga style, the other brain centers, along with the one-pointedness that allow you to have any other experiences come to quiescence, and they can't arise. Whereas in like a sutta kind of jhana, those can still operate, even though the depth of samadhi, undistractedness, utter unmoving, fixed samadhi is the same depth as in the Visuddhimagga people say, no, it's not. It is. They don't know. It's the same depth. In that way, rather than it being an exclusive samadhi, I use the word for that. I translate ekaggata rather than one-pointedness. In that style, I'd call it unification of mind. It's still a oneness. The mind is completely unmoving, but experiences come and go. And in that way, actually, all the insight stuff happens right there in the jhana. So it's a different flavor of the way that ekaggata, the jhanic factor, this one-pointedness, can manifest in two different ways. Most people on their own, you can steer it either way. You'll naturally go in one direction, and you can do that, and it can be steered in the other direction. That's a big topic. How do you do that? Most people on their own are going to go into this, what I'm calling inclusive unification of mind. A relatively small percentage can go into, this is why the Pa-Auk way, it works great and it's respected path, but for a small percentage of people go in that way. But it's not because they're better concentrators. They like to say that because everybody, look, we all want to have the best and the deepest. Come on, we do. So that's fine.
No, and then the Visuddhimagga says how rare it is. Right? They say, right. How they
not deeper,
different grade. Yeah.
Not
so it's really
deeper.
Interesting. I even heard this called aware jhana, and I kind of like that term, what you're talking about too, where there's still an amount of awareness there. So I guess where the question that comes up next is, why the confusion then in your opinion? Why
I have an
are
opinion
there
about that?
Well, yeah, you can give opinion and give factual background too.
Sure.
So yeah, everything and then more if you want around this.
Sure. I would say two things. One is people are really practicing and experiencing in all of these different ways, and that's what worked for them, and they're teaching the way that worked for them. So there's a range of experience, but there's also, if you're using the suttas or some texts or tradition or formulation as your guide, well, that'd be okay too if you want to do that. However, there's a lot of places in the Pali text where it's what's being said is very clear, but there's a lot of places where it's not clear, and the definition of jhana is about as unclear as can be. So by definition, jhana is a specific state of samadhi that matches the exact words in this phrase that's one sentence for each of the jhanas. And so anything that matches those words is jhana. Well, if you go back and look at the words, it's so vague that it does not give you much help at all. We could get specific if you want. So there's a huge range of experiences that match the verbal description, which means all of these different people, from what we would call kind of light samadhi that I might not call as jhana, to Pa-Auk, all can legitimately be teaching jhana, and it's not right or wrong. It's just, it matches the words. It's jhana. Now, back in the day, they probably, I'm guessing, had some shared understanding. So fine, but I'm not. We're not there to have to chit chat with those guys. Well, it was women too, but yeah.
No, that tends to be my current understanding too. The questions of, well, why wasn't the Buddha gave very detailed, like on four foundations, four frames of reference of mindfulness, right? Way more detailed, and even Anapana compared to jhana. Just go find a secluded place, and you're basically in first jhana. I'm oversimplifying a little bit here, but so the prevailing sentiment, I think, today in the West seems to be that, like you said, maybe during that time, it was way more familiarity with that. You didn't need to go into such vast, intricate detail about jhana. The other thing I wonder about too on this is what happens if, let's just say the Buddha thought, well, maybe due to anicca or the sasana of the Buddha, where things will change a lot. And so he needed to be more, not as detailed, because maybe what one part of the world with one person's energy system could get into jhana one way, but then maybe in a different era, in a different time, it changed significantly in a different area of the region to what. So maybe that's a possibility. I don't know. So we look at the word jhana. I think it's from a root word, jayati, which means to like steadily burn. Is that right?
It turns out a lot of people say that. I spoke with a Sanskrit scholar, and he said, actually, that's coming from it looks different root, actually. So it's not that.
Okay. So yeah, say more about that if you'd like. Yeah.
Well, I can't go back to the etymology. I could look up some books and do that.
Okay.
It just means to meditate.
Yes.
That's it.
It's right. Yeah.
Again, there are places in the Pali text, a few places where there's a wrong jhana, like when the Buddha, you see the statues that show his body was like a skeleton when he was doing those ascetic practices.
Yeah.
And in the text, it says he was doing a breathingless jhana that was not not good. So there's a few places, but overwhelmingly, almost all, it's referring to what we call the four jhanas. There. And then the interesting thing is also, I spoke with this when I was writing my book. I spoke with Peter Skilling. I don't know if I guess he's still with us on this earth. I don't know. He's a great Sanskrit and Pali scholar. He used to be the president of the Polytech Society for a while, and he's Peter Skilling, if anyone wants to look him up. And I had a conversation, and he said to me that at least two of the jhana factors, Vitakka-Vicāra, are extremely problematic, and we do not know the original meaning. And so when you look at the way it's defined, there's two, we don't have to get into it unless you want to, but there's two groups of different piles of translations that each have these two sets of meanings that are very different. And because people just take it that way, maybe that's what their experience was. We don't know what the original meaning was, and the scholars can't get to it.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
We've got problems.
Sure. Let's actually, this is to me, as we're talking about Jhana, this is absolutely fundamental, because these are the first two jhanic factors, And just a little bit of background, there's a site called Pure Dhamma. Is it .net, .org? Where he really points to this thing of possible misinterpretations, early interpretations of the canon in the Buddhist language, that a lot of these, the interpreters back then, they didn't really have a huge comprehensive understanding of, a lot of the things. And he said there's a lot of fundamental things they got wrong, according to him. And he goes into detail, but that's kind of an aside. So this just kind of bring potential validation to what Richard's saying. So jump into Vitakka-Vicāra, because I think, from what the standard that I've heard, it's, applied as the same thought, or, somewhere along these lines, but apparently there's a lot more to it than just that.
Well, right. So the translations, when I was writing my book, I went and looked up every English translation, I as many sources as I could find. And So in a Pa-Auk style, which is a Visuddhimagga, now here's one other thing we should say. Are your viewers, are they, do they know about what the Visuddhimagga is? And
well, I would sure some of them are. So you can maybe give a brief thing, because what we talk about in the suttas versus all the different commentaries and sub-commentaries,
yeah.
quite a different thing a lot of times. But yeah.
Well, I'll just bring it in. I mean, obviously,
Sure,
you know
please.
this, Josh, but I'll just say for
Sure.
your
That's
audience.
right.
So we're talking in a tradition that's been preserved in the language Pali. So it's Pali text, and the suttas are these discourses or teaching, just like sutra in Sanskrit, it's sutta in Pali. And so those, of course, are an oral tradition for many centuries. I think they were probably written down 300, 400, 500 years after the Buddha, and they got written. And then there was so that's kind of what we're talking about. But then there was a whole commentarial tradition that where people were sincerely trying to come to the real meaning and their own understanding. And so, we're really trying honestly and got commentaries. So we don't know, but 500, 600, 700 years after the Buddha, I mean, a long time, Buddhaghosa, who was a well-known commentator, wrote this. It's not a commentary, it's a treatise, but it pulls in the commentarial understanding into a meditation manual with a V called the Visuddhimagga. It's kind of a long tongue twister, but it means path of purification. And so in Theravāda Buddhism now, it's kind of these two camps. One camp is, if you want to understand the way to meditate, the Visuddhimagga is explaining to you what the suttas mean, and you have to filter it through the lens of the Visuddhimagga. That's fine. That's a system. There's the whole other camp that says, well, the Visuddhimagga got it wrong. For me personally, I wouldn't use the word got it wrong. It's just another development, but it is different. The suttas is, and a lot of the reason I wrote my book was there was so much confusion. And so I said, wait a minute, let's go back and pretend there's no Visuddhimagga. Just let's look, what does the sutta say? And then I said, let's assume there's no suttas. What does the Visuddhimagga say? We can compare them. And what it turns out is they're just two different, they have some overlap, but two quite different systems of how to practice, what jhana is, the place of insight. And so they're just different systems. So we have to be careful judging one from the view perspective of the other system. We can just respect them both. But the idea is we hold them. So in the Visuddhimagga understanding, is this okay that I'm doing it like John?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. This is great, Richard. Thanks.
So in the Visuddhimagga understanding, Vitakka-Vicāra, those first two jhana factors, are translated. So for another thing is, they should be, according to Peter Skilling, they should be taken as a pair. They go together, Vitakka-Vicāra. And it means connecting and sustaining. There's other ways. It's like aiming, and but basically it's a mental process of directing your attention. That's the connecting onto your meditation object, and then mentally holding it there on the object. That's what Vitakka-Vicāra is. The whole other understanding, which the suttas don't give any explanation, but I think of it more in a sutta, is that there's other mental activities. And so people translate it as reflection and discursive thought, thinking and pondering, even I've heard. It's just other mental activity. So for example, I'll just give you an example. You can be in jhana, and this is an interesting thing. And we say, well, the mind gets to a place where it's unmoving, which is true. But then it's very interesting because there's another part of the mind that it's not a lot, but can move. I'm saying it verbally. It may not be verbal, but it might be like, this is interesting, or what's that? Or let me feel into that, or And you can actually direct your mind and use it to move through jhana, to see what's going on, investigate. So what's going on? Are there like two minds there? And anybody I've ever talked to about said, yeah, I know. There's the unmoving, and then there's another part on top of it. So it's that part on top of it that that's other mental activity, and it could even be a little light verbal. Or this is interesting. Let me let go of this, or let me incline this way a little bit. That would be the Vitakka-Vicāra that's more than just connecting and sustaining on the object. So you can come into practice holding either view. That's flavoring influencing how you're going to practice. And depending on how it unfolds, you can look to see how it's presenting it. So there's a lot of ways to work with this. It's not one way. And some teachers will say, no, you got to go back to one way. Great. Others like me are saying, well, let's just look to see how it is. Great. So again, it's a big world.
Really good points about this Vitakka-Vicāra. And yeah, I've heard the other translations you said as well. So the very practical thing you mentioned here, it reminds me of Ajahn Suchart, who I've done a few Zooms with him, and I think how he translates Gagata is one mind, and I never heard it put like that before. So what you're explaining there is kind of like two different minds. You kind of almost have like a supervisory or something other than, and well, I will ask you here in practice, do those mind streams, I don't know if we want to call it, do they ever unify? And that doesn't happen, where that goes away. And so like maybe the second jhana experience, when Vitakka-Vicāra are supposed to fall away, does what that phenomena you were describing there, does that go away? And there's even a more, so I think that might be a follow-up here. Yeah.
Yeah. It gets subtler and subtler. Because even people who teach going beyond the four jhanas into the four formless attainments in the Visuddhimagga, they call them the formless jhanas, and the suttas. Just so people know, different terminology. So it's not a right or wrong. Sometimes you'll hear them formless jhanas. In the suttas, they're not called jhanas; they're the formless attainments. So you could hear it both ways. Even people I know who teach and would even say, well, even there, you can kind of incline. So it gets subtler and subtler. I would say as long as the sense of yourself there as an experiencer is there, it gets subtler and subtler and subtler until it's kind of then you've kind of merged or different things happen, and then none of that's operative anymore. So that's what I would say. Maybe someone might have a different, I don't know. It gets so subtle. I want to be careful of making a categorical statement.
Exactly. There's really fascinating things too with the Visuddhimagga. I guess maybe just a little bit more background for the scholarly background. Why do you think there is such a divergence? Because I can kind of see it your way. I think maybe if I'm getting this right, the Pa-Auk approach, it's primarily Abhidhamma and Visuddhimagga. However, there's still a huge referencing of the suttas to back up the method and approach. And of course, within the Visuddhimagga itself, there's, it's constantly referencing suttas, but, you have Buddhaghosa, and there's so much legend around this text too, right? Like it being rewritten from scratch, like multiple times. Am I getting that right? Or that he was actually trying to legend around it? I don't know if he was trying to gain a Brahma rebirth by doing this. So I thought there was some interesting kind of more magical legends around this or not. So I guess the more practical thing around this is why do you see such a split between these two? Well, I don't even know if a split's the right word, but just the way you painted it. Why?
Yeah. Well, look, that's an interesting question, and so it's sort of like I can think of two options, but there could be other options I'm not considering. Did the understanding of the teachings or of the methods of meditation evolve, and then the commentarial and Visuddhimagga approach reflected an evolved understanding over time? And then they started practicing in ways to match that understanding, because that's what you thought you should do. Or was it the other way around? People were having certain experiential experiences happening. And because of that, out of that became the commentarial kind of writings about it. So was it coming from a practice first, leading to the texts? Was it a textual thing? Maybe both. I mean, I don't know, but I'm imagining things evolve, right? They don't stay the same. It would be amazing to me if things didn't evolve over time and before they were written down. That would really, over centuries, if it had not shifted, that would be really amazing.
Well, absolutely. It's a really good point. when people get too, I think, locked into one thing, maybe you have to remember anicca. We also do have maybe more timeless, aspects of the Dhamma, which are going to be more or less, the same throughout, no matter what time period as well. So, it's maybe a balance of these. But yeah,
Just what, can I just say one more
please. Oh,
thing?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And here's another thing that might be controversial, but I'm just one person speaking. Again, if people don't like it, just let it go, right?
We need to push the limits and
So
test these things. Yes.
what I'm saying is the good news. So it can feel confusing to people of what should I do? What's the right way? Is there a right way? I'm hearing all these voices, and I understand that. I want to offer that the good news is it does not matter what you do. I mean, I'm not meaning in general, like you don't want to go out and create harm and all that, but I mean, as a Dharma, doing these practices, it's an all of the above. And, any practices that help your mind come to more steadiness, so it's not just scattered all over the place, more clarity of mindfulness, insights, all the heart qualities of kindness, empathy, compassion, love, discernment, non-reactivity, and just every quality you can think of can bring you to liberation. And there are many, many ways to do it. And so I just don't think it matters at all.
It's a really good point, because what we're talking about here can easily lead people into doubt, and that's not what I want to do here at all.
Yeah.
Rich, we bring it back to skillful states. Skillful means in skillful states, what Richard was saying.
Yeah.
And then we will eventually see and know it for ourselves, and then we can test it with our own wisdom. So yeah, I agree with that. So yeah, I mean that will lead us here into maybe the five faculties, which I feel that Pa-Auk teaches really well about how to bring more strength and balance to one's practice. They at least my teacher points to the five faculties quite a bit in balancing those, as well as far as helping with samatha. A real practical one for me, maybe being a little bit over active on a mental sphere, I wouldn't say overthinking, but like a lot of mental activity from time to time. So I just want to ask for maybe some real practical guidance, because I hear some teachers, where they'll say, well, thinking's not the problem, but, they give lip service that, no, it's okay. It's no big deal. But then they go into micromanaging,
Right.
every little thing, which basically says it is wrong. And then I have teachers say, no, it's actually, thinking is a hindrance. So, I don't know where I feel on this all, because, the mind can be like a genius machine at times, but it's not the only tool for the job. When we have this huge background in the West, where a lot of us get validation and importance and make livings and, have brilliance, and it's encouraged to have kind of a papancha proliferation. But when we see, and then it doesn't really help to struggle with it and fight it either, because that just kind of makes it worse. So what is your view and approach to the thinking mind as well? I think it's a big one for a lot of us.
So before I tell you the most important thing, which is let's not make a big deal about thinking, and I'll say a little about what I mean. First, I want to say, yes, of course, there are times when it can serve us well, especially in the case when there's a lot of thinking going on. It could be many causes and conditions. The main one for many people is our minds just aren't trained, and that's the practice we're doing. So we don't make a big deal. We're on the path to train it, and it will settle out, get better. Will it become zero? I don't know about that, but it can settle out a lot. But also, but there can be times when it can be interesting just to feel in if there's really, especially something repetitive, or there's an energy or feeling to it. It might be, let me feel underneath this. Is there, and you may or may not get anything, but is there something fueling this? And then it might be, oh yeah, before I came on this retreat, or before at home, I sat on this, I got in an argument with someone, and I'm still feeling, that's where we need to hang out with our mindfulness. And then maybe it's like, yeah, I've got some anger, or I've got some fear or resentment or whatever. And then I've told people sometimes, on retreat, I would say, well, look, if you want to sit and be with that and let go, fine. But you know what? It might serve you to, don't tell the other teachers I'm telling you this, but there's a phone down here I can let you use. go call the person up, tell them you're sorry, or see if you can clean it up. And then what's the point of sitting there with that? And then because, or do whatever's wise and skillful is what I'm saying. So yes, there can be times we want to tend to something to help bring it down. But to me, it's more in the context of, I don't think in terms of, I think of it like this. When we're practicing, the way I mostly work with people is I mostly work with what we call meditation objects, where there's some experience like breathing that you're putting your attention on. I should say there are some people, even in the beginning, who do more of an open, inclusive, it's like you're resting back in open awareness and more receiving experiences. That works for some people, but so yes, that's fine if that works for them. Most people, you put your attention on whatever, I'll say the breath. You keep coming back over and over. And I'm not worrying about anything else about the thoughts. Just don't worry about it, because there's all kinds of things going on. Body sensations, sounds, moods, emotions, thoughts. What you're doing is you're giving, I would say, a preference or predominance of awareness on that without overly pushing, but you're just giving an emphasis there. And everything else you allow just to be in the background, unless you can't allow it in the background, then we need to work with it. It's as simple as that. And then we don't have to think about, just don't worry. We don't need to spend time on the thoughts. Just do that. And let's see what happens as it settles out. And then also that's combined with, to me, the most important meditation instruction there is ease and relaxation the best you can. Now, not always easy to do, so you don't want to struggle to not struggle. I understand that. But especially we're dealing with physical pain, mental pain. But the best we can, is there anything I can do to help me feel safe here? Help me feel just as relaxed and at ease as I can. What will do that? And we could have a whole conversation how you do that. And then checking in several times during a sit. Oh, am I suffering in the mind? Is there something in the body? What can I do to help me drop into the ease and relaxation? And then if we're in that place, we don't struggle against things so much, including our thoughts. And we just say, okay, now let me just continue with coming here. If thoughts intrude, fine, let them go. If my mind won't stop obsessing about the fact that I'm obsessing, okay, let it go. You just keep coming back. And we can hold it all more lightly. So that's kind of, to me, a way that I would think in general about the thoughts. I understand other people have a different. If you're practicing in a tradition that says thoughts are a problem, then they must have some methods for you to work with it. I don't know what they are, but they'll tell you to do something. And then you could do that. I don't know what they would say, because if you can stop your thoughts, if you want to stop your thoughts, I'll say, great. But then the question is, well, I don't know how to do it. And then what do I do? And I don't know. Maybe somebody else knows.
Yeah, don't go under anesthesia without a doctor's permission, right? But I don't even know if that stops it. You just won't be aware that you're doing it anymore. So bad joke, I guess. Yeah. So Richard, I think we ought to start at least wrapping up a part one here. That was great, because for me, yeah, if there's an overemphasis on it, well, then we're going to amplify it, right? We're going to give it more energy and artificially inflate it too. But there is a lot more to be said, like you said, on this whole thing. For me, it was ethics, waking up to the fact, 2012, when I first started, how actually bad I was treating myself and other people around me, and had no idea about it. So the 5 precepts were, and still are, and are absolutely foundational, because a lot of interpretations on restlessness and remorse, a lot of people leave out remorse. And of course, there's a healthy remorse and an unhealthy remorse, right? The hiriotapa, that's a helpful thing. And then there's rumination and beating oneself up.
Beating yourself up.
Exactly. So there's a difference there. But for me, that the early part of my practice was waking up to all this stuff, and actually, reaching out to people to ask for forgiveness. It was time. I want to do it. It was helpful. And it was even funny how I don't even remember that. Well, I did. So either way, it is a huge accelerator too. And forgiveness, I think, can't be forced. And you can ask for forgiveness. We can forgive and then forgive oneself, which are with the Judeo-Christian background. We're not really taught that a lot, that we can forgive
Yeah,
ourselves.
yeah,
A huge letting go of a burden, not to be forced, not to say the action should be even tolerated,
yeah,
but
yeah,
yeah. So anyway, that's just one tiny aspect of what
yeah.
we're talking about
Important.
to help them. Yeah, very foundational and fundamental for sure.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
there's so many different aspects to getting to the mind to calm and settle and to come into unification and settledness as well.
yeah, yeah.
And then the benefits of that. Maybe if we do a part 2, we can go into, well,
Sure.
why bother with all this stuff to begin with, which is fundamental as well. So,
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
Richard, I so appreciate your time. I mean, we
Sure.
did this despite the technical difficulties online and offline,
Yeah, yeah.
but
No, I'm
that's
really
life. That's
happy.
real life. Yeah.
It's great hanging out with you, and just kind of having talking about these things. For me, just brings it really alive. So I've really appreciated getting to know you and hanging out with you. It's great.
Well, great. It's my pleasure. Tell people how they can get in touch with you, what kind of offerings you have, and what you've got going
Yeah, yeah.
on,
Um,
and then take out a message if you'd like, if you have any kind of way to wrap this up, or what you'd like to leave any listeners with. If and it's okay to pass on that too, just so.
sure. Well, if people want to get in touch with me, let's see. There's a couple of ways. My organization is called Metta Dharma, Metta with 2 T's, like in the Pali, Metta Dharma Foundation. And you can go to our website, mettadharma.org or .com. And through there, we have a weekly group. I teach retreats a few times a year. We do some day long, just different stuff. Everything we do is we do our weekly thing. It's got a Zoom component, so people who aren't local can participate. So people can check that out. If you want, there's a place you can. If you want to get in touch with me, you hit contact, and it will. Email will come. I would get it. Or if you just want to email, you can just email metta@mettadharma.org and send emails. And I try to respond to people. If I'm too busy, or I would let people know, but I try to be responsive. So that's a way to get in touch there. And, I don't know that I've got I guess I should have some, look, I guess if I wanted to, I hadn't thought about like imparting my wisdom, but I guess what comes up for me is I know it for some of us, we can be particularly hard on ourselves and judge ourselves by how well or poorly, good or bad, we think we're showing up or doing it, whatever the it is. And I understand that, but how well or poorly we act in any situation is really, that's just the conditioned patterns of our minds. That's what we're working on, is shifting the conditioned patterns. And when that happens, what I found useful is to connect back with what my sincere, as a Dharma practitioner, my sincere aspirations or intentions are. And I'll bet everyone has a good intention, and whatever your own languaging is of wanting to live in a way that creates less suffering in the world for yourself, for others, wants to create more well-being for yourself and for others. And if that's true for you, even when you're at your worst, you can still know that you really do care about that intention, and that's alive for you. And I find it going back to that somehow, and know that still is my good intention, and I'm doing the best I can. We're all just doing the best I can, and then it is helpful, so we're not too hard on ourselves, and we can still stay attuned. Let that intention kind of bolster us, kind of a thing. So that's what I would share. It's been helpful for me.
Well, I could only echo that, Richard. So thank you for that. And thank you for everyone listening as well. Bye now.
Okay.